Okay, your next section is 2.5 internal audit resources. Okay. The chief audit executive, in fact, the one who is often known as by the head of internal audit or the internal audit director, it is his responsibility that he needs to ensure that the internal audit activity, the department he is heading, is able to fulfill its responsibilities. All the staff in the internal audit department will be working under him. So it's very important that he should identify the skills, knowledge available, the competencies of his staff member, and whether the existing staff members are sufficient to fulfill those responsibilities. So Chief Audit Executive, the head of internal audit department, he must ensure that the department he is heading is able to fulfill all its responsibilities. Like if we want to conduct certain engagement on efficiency and effectiveness, the operational audit, we'll study about that later, in a pharmaceutical industry. So we should have expertise and skills and competencies available within the department to conduct that specific engagement. So it is his responsibility to identify the available knowledge within the department he is heading, the skills available within that department, and other competencies. So it will help him if he assesses this, the skills, the competencies, the knowledge available within this department. It will help the departmental head, the chief audit executive, that whether the current available staff, is it sufficient so that we can conduct various engagements, various assignments that are assigned as the internal auditors. So that is very important and crucial. And the word has been used must, meaning it is the responsibility of the internal audit head that he has to ensure that the skills, the knowledge, the competencies are sufficient to provide the suitable services in an appropriate manner. So there are certain standards regarding this. We'll study about that in the coming slides. And this assessment of assessing the sufficiency of skills, competencies, knowledge, it's not just one-off, it is a regular activity that must be conducted frequently, at least annually. And the certain areas of skills and competencies that the internal audit head must assess are given in the next slide I will show. The following practices help the chief audit executive identify the available resources. The chief audit executive should conduct periodic skills. When I said periodic, mean at least once in a year. At least, it could be quarterly, could be maybe after every 6 months, but at least yearly. At least yearly. The chief audit executive should conduct periodic skills assessment to determine the specific resources available. And as I said, that this assessment should be done at least once in a year. And the specific skills and competencies we are looking for in our staff members within the audit departments. What are those? We're looking for the interpersonal skills. As I've discussed, that the interpersonal skills are a crucial area for the internal auditor, because he will be interacting with various staff members of the organization, clients, auditees, in other words. So he will be having interaction with other people. So this is a very crucial area of his performance. And as we have discussed, the proficiency in certain areas is needed. That is procedures, tools, and standards. So to what extent the internal auditor possesses this skill, again, this is the responsibility of the internal auditor. So the tools and techniques and the internal audit standards. We have already agreed tool, techniques, and internal audit standards. This is the area covered under proficiency. So internal auditor must be proficient in this method. So internal audit standards, their theory, methodology, and other knowledgeable areas that are needed for the job. Next, how do internal audit department head, the chief audit executive, can assess the performance needed by the internal audit department staff? There is a specific way that has been laid down in the standards. It says that there's a word which we use, appraisals, that is frequently used in big multinational companies or larger size companies. Appraisal is an annual activity in which the staff performance is evaluated, their timeliness, punctuality, regularity, performance related metrics, how do they perform, working under pressure, behavior with the juniors and seniors. This is done every year in big companies for performance evaluation for the purpose of promotions and salary increments. So such appraisals are part of the HR, but within the internal audit department, the head of internal audit will conduct staff appraisals, assessments of their abilities, their competencies. So these appraisals will help the chief audit executive assess future training needs of the staff abilities. If there is something lacking, the internal audit department's head will arrange the trainings, the facilities, the orientations. Every accounting qualification, ACCA, CIA, CMA, CPA, whatever you name, it has a permanent and mandatory part after qualifying, which you call the CPE or CPD, that is continuing professional development, yeah, continuing professional education. This is important. Even once you qualified, you have to keep your knowledge updated. So for that's need that you have to keep your knowledge updated. So that is also crucial for the internal audit department staff, that if they are CIAs, maybe they're qualified and experienced, but they have to update their knowledge and skills. So continuing professional development, that's a part of every accounting and professional accounting qualification. Continuing professional development encourages continued growth. If you are gaining on experience, knowledge, it will help you move forward in the career and be more productive for the internal audit department. So such trainings are compulsory if they are needed for the performance of job within the internal audit department. So required training also should be considered when identifying internal audit resources. Required training means training that may be needed from some external service providers. Sometimes internal audit staff is sent outside for training. Sometimes it is provided in-house. So both are needed if they are required for the performance of engagements within the company. So remember, but still if the training from even external or internal sources do not yield the results, then in that case we may use some external service providers. Like for example, we have 10 people working in the internal audit department and none of them is specialized in the actuarial sciences, because the work is not frequently needed in the internal audit department. No, there is such assignment. And we can't spend internal audit staff who spend a couple of years on acquiring the knowledge of actuarial sciences. So in that case, we can take the help of some external service provider. So if the internal audit department is not able to fulfill internal audit responsibilities because the work is so complex and difficult and is hard to acquire, the use of external service provider must be considered. You can use that. So the knowledge, the skills, competencies needed for the work, that must be acquired by the internal audit, but certain unique, complex knowledge that is not normally expected from internal auditors, in that case the use of external service providers must always be considered. So what are the competencies, knowledge areas, specific skills? For that, the head of internal audit department must construct a database, must construct an information about every internal audit department staff, about what are the skills they have, the abilities. So it will be very important and easy for them to trace if there is any knowledge gap. So the database can be used to store internal audit background information, which employees have which skills, So this information can be very helpful, and if there is any gap, it could be compensated. So the information stored in such a database includes the skills have, the completed projects, acquired training, development needs. So it could be very helpful for the chief audit executive to fulfill its responsibility to keep his internal audit department active. So there is a specific standard on this. As I'm telling you again, practice advisory and certain standards, their numbers are not important, but what they are saying that you need to learn well. That's why I have designed these slides much more in detail. So the next practice advisory is 1210, proficiency, which states that, again, the same things which you have read, that internal audit department must collectively possess certain knowledge, certain areas of competencies. Not every internal auditor is IT expert, but if our work involves the use of information technology systems, then at least a person or a couple of persons must be available within the internal department, audit department, so as to perform that work. So internal audit department should collectively, not every person is expert in everything, but the overall internal audit department should collectively possess the knowledge, the skills, and other competencies which are essential for the work within the organization where we are working. If we are working in a pharmaceutical business, so a couple of employees within the internal audit department must be familiar with the pharma knowledge, the knowledge of medicine, the composition of medicine, their cost structures and related information that are necessary. And if that information and the knowledge is complicated and hard to acquire and is not frequently needed, then in that case we can use the work of some other outside external service provider. But so that is always an option. But if it's frequently used knowledge that is required for the conduct of work within the company, then you should have a full-time employee with that unique particular skill and knowledge. So his last addition given: performing an annual analysis of internal audit activities knowledge. Mean every year, at least every year, the chief audit executive must conduct an analysis that the departmental staff have the knowledge, the skills, and other competencies that are needed to perform the work within the organization. If there is any knowledge gap and then any deficiency, then certain training arrangements could be set up so that the internal audit department staff becomes relevant for the work they are appointed for. Now let's see what are the other requirements within this subunit. We have read that there are 4 areas of knowledge: proficiency, knowledge, understanding, and appreciation. Proficiency in internal audit standards, procedures, and techniques that we use, and that must be present within the internal audit department. That is not something that must be outsourced. It must be present. But the other areas, the knowledge, understanding, and appreciation, that's the area where the research and the work of other outside service providers might be required. So the continuing professional development, CPD, is essential to help ensure internal audit staff remains proficient in 3 domains: standards, techniques, and procedures used in the work of internal audit. And that's where we will be tested massively: proficiency in standards, procedures, and techniques. The rest of the things, IT, communication skills, accounting, etc., is not as a crucial part, but proficiency in the standards and applying the techniques and procedures that are covered in your CIA part 1 and 2, that's are very crucial. But in certain cases, where the skill is lacking, in that case we can hire the expert outside consultant who can assist us in that particular work, especially with the area where internal audit department lacks that specific knowledge and skill. So it means the internal audit activity can gain outside expert advice or assistance that is needed to conduct the work, and that knowledge especially is not available within the internal audit department. But again, the proficiency in particular area, that 3 areas: the standards, the procedures, and techniques, that's your core area. That is something that internal auditors must be adept at, they must be expert at. The rest of the areas, the knowledge domains can of course be outsourced. Now, then the next concept coming is the outsourcing and co-sourcing. And let us first understand these terms, what they are. You are working in a company, like for example, Maple Cement. Your organization can outsource internal audit department within the company you're working for. The example is Maple Leaf Cement, for example. Your organization may outsource none of the internal audit activity. It can outsource all, or it can outsource some of the functions of internal audit activity. Now, what it means, in the first case, there is no outsourcing. The entire internal audit department is in-house, managed within the company. An organization may outsource none, nothing is outsourced. Full-time 10 employees headed by the chief audit executive, and the internal audit work is done inside by those individuals within the company. There's a second possibility that internal audit department entirely could be outsourced. An organization may outsource none. There's a complete internal audit department. There is a possibility that organization can outsource the complete internal audit department, or there is a third case which we call the co-sourcing, that some of the functions of internal audit activities are outsourced, rest, like for example, in this case, in the first case, we are working with 10 people in the internal audit department. There is no one from outside. All are within the company, full-time company employees. Second possibility, there is none of the company employees in the internal audit department and all have been outsourced. And in the third case, there are 5 people from within the company in the internal audit department and 5 have to be outsourced. So this can be called that there is no outsourcing, there is complete outsourcing, and in this case it is called co-sourcing, that some of the work is done by the, or some of the functions are performed by within the employees within the company, internal audit department, and the rest of them are, for specific functions, are outsourced. So that's the possibility. So whatever, whether it is fully outsourced, whether it is partially outsourced, whether it is none of it is outsourced, whatever the situation, the work of internal audit, outsourced, insourced or co-sourced or whatever, it has to be governed by the standards of internal auditing issued by the Institute of Internal Audit. That is what says exactly here, that however oversight of and responsibility for the internal audit must not be outsourced. And who is the one oversighting? That's very crucial. We agree that internal audit department can be totally an in-house department. It could be totally outsourced, and the third case would be partly outsourced, partly insourced, I mean partly within the company. But who is overseeing the work of internal audit department? The audit committee. Audit committee, of course, cannot be outsourced. Audit committee is a part of the organization governance process. You cannot outsource governance. So that means that the head of internal audit could be outsourced totally from external outside service provider, but the person who he reports to, the audit committee, must be an entity within the company. The oversight and the responsibility of internal audit activity must not be outsourced. Somebody responsible within the company who receives the internal audit reports definitely cannot be outsourced. Means that the independent directors must form an audit committee, and that audit committee functions cannot be outsourced. So, and moreover, whatever the degree of outsourcing, every situation must be considered in a way that standards of internal auditing are followed, whether it is partly outsourced, totally outsourced, or there is no outsourcing. So services must be performed in accordance with the standards and the guidance for obtaining external services within the Institute of Internal Auditing framework. That's a very important concept that must be remembered. So we have considered that there are three possibilities, that there is none of it is outsourced, it's partial outsourcing, or it's a complete outsourcing. And the most suitable way is that co-sourcing, that some of expertise we have, special knowledge of the business, the employees working in within the company, they have much better knowledge than the outsiders. So we can appoint 5 people from within the company as internal auditors, and we can hire or co-source 5 from some external service provider, and we establish a department that is partly insourced and partly outsourced, which is called co-sourcing. So the employees from within the company have the inside knowledge of how the business works, and those 4 or 5 individuals coming from outside, they have the expert knowledge, specific knowledge of standards, how to work, how to conduct work, the procedures, the techniques. So such outsourcing is normally done from external service providers or like audit firms. Like our student Salman from Kuwait, he is working in an audit firm, and in fact he is providing outsourcing service to local banks. So audit firms, employees who are involved in audit, they are expert in auditing, so these individuals can be outsourced to various companies to serve in the internal audit department. So outsourcing and co-sourcing. Co-sourcing means that the some of the internal audit departments are employees of the company, and some are from the external service providers. This is called co-sourcing. So co-sourcing could take two possible forms. It could be partial outsourcing, and outsourcing in fact, not co-sourcing. Outsourcing alternatives include the following: either we go for a partial outsource, or we can go for a total outsourcing on ongoing basis. And again, the responsibility for oversight of internal audit department cannot be outsourced. Complete internal audit department can be outsourced, but the reporting, functional reporting, is done to the audit committee, and that is in fact the entity within the organization, a part of governance system. So outsourcing could be partial or total, or it could be a co-sourcing, means some specific engagement. You can ask someone, some external service provider, or it could be an ongoing basis. But ultimately, whatever the situation is, that the work must be done within the framework of the standards issued by the Institute of Internal Auditors. So internal audit department, the head of internal audit department or the internal auditors, you cannot expect them to be expert in all domains. They have their knowledge limitations. Proficiency, as you have read in the previous lecture, is only needed in the standards, the procedures and techniques. So not all internal audit staff are proficient in all areas, and we may have to obtain certain necessary knowledge, and sometimes we need to reach out to the external service provider for the purpose of audit. So when necessary, the chief audit executive can obtain, of course, necessary knowledge, skills and competencies from external service providers, either on one-off basis, ad hoc basis when needs come, or it could be on ongoing basis. Depends upon the situation, the circumstances we find ourselves in. So there have been certain guidelines issued by the Institute of Internal Auditors in their practice advisory number 1210.A1. We don't need to remember any number, please remember that. You will not be tested on numbers. You must extract the knowledge from these standards, what they are trying to teach you. Don't memorize these numbers, not needed. So the Institute of Internal Audit provides comprehensive guidelines on this non-internal audit personnel from outside. Proficiency is needed only, as I am repeatedly telling you, in the standards, in the techniques and procedures. But certain areas that are lacking, the knowledge that is lacking in the internal audit department, it could be outsourced. That's what it says. Obtaining external service providers to support or complement the internal audit activity. Each member of internal audit activity need not be qualified in all disciplines. Our knowledge is, of course, as internal audit, is limited to standards, to the techniques and procedures. We are not specialist experts in accounting or auditing or economics, tax, etc. So we can take help from the outside service providers on these specific domains given in the next slides. The internal audit department, of course, is authorized to use the work of external service providers in the areas that we have studied in your previous lecture, the appreciation and understanding level. There is accounting, auditing, not specifically the internal audit works, it could be financial audit, operational audit, compliance audit, social audit. There's various types of audit. We'll study about that later. So we may not have the specific skill for that, like we are unable to perform compliance audit because we do not have the knowledge of law. In that case, it could be outsourced, or external help could be sought. We're not expert in economics, could be outsourced. Statistics, like actuarial sciences, we do not have the skill, you can outsource. You're not an IT expert, outsource. You're not engineering expert, you're not tax consultant or a lawyer or an environmental affairs specialist for environmental audits. So in these domains, there is no proficiency required as per the standards, or any other areas that internal audit activity is responsible for. So these areas where we lack the expertise, this could be outsourced from the third or external service providers. So the next slide will tell you that who are the qualified external service providers, who can be asked to provide the external service providers. Qualified external service providers may be recruited from many sources. The first and the foremost is the external audit firm. Like a bank might hire consultants from audit firm to serve a particular domain within their scope of work. So the external audit firm could be a source to get expert opinion. Some consulting firm, management consultancy firm, or some university where some professor or some group of professors or some students who are working on some research project, mean they have the academic knowledge. So the consultants or the experts could come from audit firm, from consulting firm, from university. So whatever the source is. External service provider, like for example, he's given you the audit firm, the consulting firm, or university. Any external service provider who has some association with the, for example, association engagement client. For example, I want to conduct the audit of finance department, and let's say we do not have the skill of financial audit. The finance department is headed by CFO, who is and he has been working in an audit firm, for example, audit firm X. We appoint an external service provider to provide us assistance in the work of financial audit, and from the same audit firm X, and from the person Y, who happens to be close relative of the current CFO. Now this puts us in a very complicating situation. We are auditing the finance department from the same audit firm, and CFO's close relative is being asked to provide that specific external service. This is clearly conflict of interest. The external service provider has his professional responsibility as an auditor or as a consultant. At the same time, he has a personal relationship with the CFO. So this is not acceptable. So an external service provider associated with the engagement client, like CFO, external service provider, the auditor is associated with the CFO, this is unacceptable. Why? Because that person would not be independent, because he has personal relationship with the CFO. He will not be objective, he will not be free from bias or influence. So that ends your subunit 2.5.